I watched her smile fall apart the second the notary read the last clause, the one everyone else skipped, the one that turned a funeral into a reckoning. By the time we left that conference room, the woman who swore I was nothing to this family had to sign her name on a paper that proved I was everything my father intended. Narrator's name, Lauren Whitaker. If you clicked because the thumbnail promised a stepmother who tried to grab $450,000 and a house, only to be stopped by a single line in a document, you are in the right place. This is my channel, After Her Lies, where I tell the stories families would rather bury. Today, I am telling you what happened after my father died, after I was told I had been cut out, and how one clause and a quiet plan made the truth louder than any lie. I am 34, a teacher turned full-time creator in Houston. My dad, Mark, was a union electrician who started with the city in 1997, met my mother at a chili cook-off, and loved ledger paper more than most people love dessert. He remarried in 2018, 2 years after my mom passed, to a woman named Denise. She ran a nail salon in Sugar Land and smiled like she had secrets. When my dad had a stroke on January 5, 2025, I felt an old ache return, the fear of losing a parent again. He passed on March 4, 2025. 4 days later, I learned there was a will dated June 12, 2023, and I was told it left me a box of photographs while everything else went to her. The stakes were clean and cruel. There was the house on Azalea Way, a ranch with a porch and a mortgage that had needed top-ups during the pandemic. And there was a brokerage account with $450,000 that my dad had built month by month. There were documents, capital D documents, a will, a durable power of attorney, a deed on the house, a list of pay-on-death designations. The kind of stack that makes grown adults whisper and smile and lie. The first injustice was not subtle. At the funeral, Denise stood at the guest book greeting people and skipped my name like it was a curse. Later that afternoon, over a table of casseroles and paper plates, she told a room full of my father's friends that I had walked away from the family, that I did not come around, that I was only there for the money. My dad's barber flinched. A neighbor set down his fork. I swallowed something rusty and said I was the one who drove Dad to speech therapy in 2022 and 2023, that I fixed the leak in the guest bath, that I have his cracked Stanley thermos in my car. She laughed. She told me to wait for the will reading. She said I would be embarrassed soon enough. The will reading was set for March 18th, a Tuesday, at 2 in the afternoon, because lawyers like to meet when the sun still favors them. The estate attorney, a silver-haired man named Hargrove with a framed Texas flag on his wall, sat at the head of a conference table and flipped through pages with the calm of a surgeon. A notary named Mira Patel sat beside him, efficient and warm, a woman whose stamp carried more weight than any of our opinions. My stepbrother Kyle, 26, wore a suit he borrowed from a friend and sneakers that looked like they could outrun the truth. Hargrove read the provisions, specific bequests of tools and a coin collection, the residual clause that left the remainder of the probate estate to Denise. He explained what probate means, what passes under the will, what is outside of it. That is when my stomach settled, but no one knew why yet. Denise smirked when the notary held up the self-proving affidavit. She smirked when my name did not appear next to dollar signs. Then Hargrove mentioned Schedule B, a one-page list my dad had attached and updated in 2024, titled Non-Probate Transfers. He said the words quietly, meant to pass by operation of law, not through this will. That is when Denise's smile trembled, because anyone who knows money knows that list can matter more than all the pages notarized in blue ink. I will tell you the second injustice before the plan. It is important because it is how people like Denise win, with a drip of shame and public pressure. After that meeting, she announced to anyone who would listen that the house and the brokerage would be done and dusted by the end of the month, that she had a durable power of attorney, and that the bank was already processing new beneficiary forms. She said my father had changed his mind in January. She waved a manila folder at me like it was a sword. She said I should be grateful for the photo albums. She told me to go back to making YouTube videos, that grown-up things were happening now. There were obstacles, real ones. The county's online records portal showed nothing when I searched my father's last name and the word deed. The recording office phone line played a looping message about staffing shortages and delayed indexing. At the bank where my dad kept the brokerage account, a glass-walled trust office smelled like coffee and printer toner and told me nothing. The manager, a woman with a braid that reached the middle of her back, said beneficiary designations are private until death, and beyond death only to the personal representative. Denise had already petitioned to be named executor. It felt like a wall I could not climb. I left that lobby with a pamphlet about grief, a humming anger, and a parking ticket. I made a list that night. I wrote dates, names, and amounts. Dad's stroke on January 5th. The date on the will, June 12th, 2023. The call I made to 911 when he fell that summer, June 21st, 2024. I wrote the word house and underlined it. I wrote the word account and underlined it twice. I wrote a third word, capacity, because anyone who plays games with signatures has to play games with that word. If you do not have capacity, you cannot change where money goes when you die. And even if you do, banks do not accept beneficiary changes signed by an agent under a power of attorney unless an explicit power exists, and sometimes not even then. That is a policy thing, not a law thing, but a policy thing can be a wall. The plan was not dramatic. It was precise. The summer before, in September 2024, my dad had filmed with me for this channel. I had asked him to tell the story of the first time he realized he needed to teach me about money. He cried halfway through, wiped his eyes, and then told me he had taken care of what mattered most to him. He said he never wanted me and Denise to fight over the house or the account. He said he had signed a transfer on death deed on the house so that it would go to me without probate, and he had listed me as the transfer on death beneficiary on the brokerage. He said he did not care who got the coin collection. That moment felt private then. Now it was a legal roadmap and a promise. 2 days after the funeral, before the will reading, I had searched my email. I found a scanned copy my dad had sent me in June 2023 after the notary came to the house. File name House TOD Deed Lauren. It was a revocable transfer on death deed. It fit Texas law with the property legal description, the parcel number, the words that matter. Grantor retains all ownership until death, designates beneficiary, named as me. Revocation clause reserved to my dad. It had Mira Patel's notary stamp and certificate with that date in June. There was a second file, brokerage TOD form, with a signature dated May 29, 2023. On that form, he named me as the beneficiary of the account ending 4427. The firm was a national brokerage. There was a fax confirmation line in the top right corner. Dad had circled it with a pen. He had sent me the files with a 2-line message. "Keep these where you keep important things, kiddo." I cleared my throat and swallowed the kind of love that arrives like a fist opening. The problem was that a scan is not a recording stamp. You can sign a deed, but if you do not record it at the county recorder's office before death, finding it again can be a nightmare. Texas law lets you record after, but the cleaner path is to be in system before a death. That was obstacle 1. Obstacle 2 was that the brokerage forms might have been changed in January. Denise said he changed them. I needed to know if he had the capacity to do that and whether the bank accepted the change. So I called my dad's neurologist, the one who saw him after the first stroke in 2022, and I asked for a letter. I asked for a simple timeline. When he last examined my father, what his notes said about cognitive ability after the January 5th event. The doctor, a serious man named Sharp with quiet hands, wrote a letter dated March 10, 2025. In it, he stated that my father demonstrated significant cognitive impairment after January 5th that rendered him unable to understand or appreciate the nature and consequences of financial decisions from that date through the date of his death. He attached the test scores. He included words like executive function and memory encoding. I paid $45 for the letter and picked it up with a gratitude that made my chest hurt. I also called Mira Patel. I found her through the notary stamp, typed her commission number into the state website, and got her business listing. When she answered, I said my name and my father's, and she paused and then spoke my name like a memory. She remembered my dad. She remembered the June visit. She said he had made sweet tea that afternoon and offered her some even though she never drinks on the job. She remembered the deed wording because she had notarized 3 that week, and his was the only one with an overlay sticker that caught on her sleeve. She told me to go to the county office in person, not to trust the online index. She told me to bring the file number on the bottom of the scan because sometimes a document is recorded but not linked to a last name correctly yet. She told me to breathe. On March 14th, I went to the Harris County Administration Building. The records office smelled like paper and patience. A clerk with a lanyard full of pins looked up the number and then frowned at the monitor. She tapped the keyboard again and then walked to a back room. She returned with a thin folder and a smile. The deed had been recorded on June 14th, 2023, 2 days after it was signed. It had been indexed to the parcel number, but not to my father's name yet because of a formatting error. She slid a certified copy across the counter. I paid $8 for the certification and an $89 copy fee because I wanted 3. 1 for the lawyer, 1 for me, 1 for the camera. She said I had picked a good day. She said the backlog put some recordings out of sight for weeks. I put the folder in my bag and felt something unclench. I was not chasing a ghost anymore. Once I knew the house was clean, I turned to the account. I drafted a letter to the brokerage's estate department. I attached a copy of the death certificate, the TOD form from 2023, and Dr. Sharp's letter. I wrote that any attempted change in January would be void if made by my father and not processed due to incapacity, and void if made by an agent under a power of attorney because the beneficiary designation power was not explicit in his POA. I did not know if that last part was true yet. I just knew how banks tend to behave. They do not like to let agents change beneficiaries. I mailed the letter certified. The receipt was $2.35. Small numbers can be anchors. 2 days before the will reading, I sat in my apartment with a pen, a legal pad, and my dad's voice on video. I listened to him say my name and the words he had written on his instructions list. House to Lauren by transfer on death. Account to Lauren by transfer on death. No fight, no court, no surprises. He smiled. He looked into the lens like he wanted to hug it. I copied the exact wording onto the pad and slid the video into a folder. I do not use recordings without consent. My dad gave it freely because he knew I would need it if someone lied. We returned to March 18th and the conference room, with a long table and too many coasters with the firm's logo. Hargrove worked through the will page by page, then sifted the attachments. When he got to Schedule B, he asked the notary to read it into the record. Not a legal requirement, but a choice that gave the moment weight. Mira cleared her throat and read the title, Non-Probate Transfers, as of June 12, 2023. She read line 1, brokerage account ending 4427, transfer on death to beneficiary Lauren Whitaker, effective upon grantor's death, to be processed by custodian upon receipt of death certificate. She read line 2, real property located at 2226 Azalea Way, Harris County, by revocable transfer on death deed, recorded June 14, 2023, to vest in beneficiary Lauren Whitaker upon grantor's death. And then she read the line that turned Denise's smile into something brittle. In the event any beneficiary named herein or any devisee under this will contest any non-probate transfer described in this schedule, such person shall forfeit any benefit under this will, including any designation as personal representative. It was that last clause, tucked into a note, cross-referenced to a paragraph called No Contest Provision, that made Denise's eyes flick to Hargrove's and then away, because it meant if she challenged me on the house or the account, she could lose her position and her share of the rest. It was quiet for a moment long enough for everyone to do the math. Denise broke the silence by saying the June list was outdated. She said there had been changes in January. She said she had a power of attorney and that my father had told her to fix things to protect her. She lifted the manila folder as if it were a trophy. Hargrove looked at it like it was a storm cloud. He asked to see it. He flipped through pages, frowned, and put it down. He explained in a voice he probably used with clients who wanted to turn water into money, that a power of attorney becomes void at death, and that beneficiary changes rarely can be made by an agent anyway, without explicit authorization. He explained that even if my father had signed a new designation while impaired, the firm would likely reject it once they saw a capacity letter. He reminded her of the no contest clause and what it meant. She said he was being dramatic. She said the clause was a scare tactic. That is when I placed the certified copy of the deed on the table. I slid it across the polished wood, the raised seal catching the fluorescent lights. I did not smile. I just spoke. The house transfers outside of this will. The deed was recorded in June. It says that upon my father's death, the title vests in me. It is not a suggestion. It is a done thing. Denise leaned back as if the paper carried heat. Kyle blinked like someone had changed the channel from sports to math. Mira scanned the certification page and nodded. Hargrove adjusted his glasses and said that simplified things. He said probate would not include the house. He said the executor would need to adjust the inventory. Denise said it was fraud. Mira lifted her stamp and said it was her stamp. The room grew newly quiet. The meeting ended with a plan for the next steps. Hargrove would file the will with the probate court. Denise would petition to be personal representative unless she wanted to think carefully about that no contest clause. I would proceed with the deed transfer at the county, which meant filing an affidavit of death. I would also wait for the brokerage to respond. He said there might be a hearing if anyone objected to anything. He said, in a tone I recognized from men who build fences, that the court does not like drama. It likes documents. I nodded. Denise did not nod. She said she would see me in court. Mira looked at me like she was sending me strength from an old well. I walked out of that building into a sun that felt earned. A week later, a letter from the brokerage arrived in a thick envelope. A compliance officer named Linda signed it. She wrote that their records showed a transfer on death designation in my favor on the account ending 4427, processed on May 31, 2023. She wrote that in January, a package had been delivered requesting a change of beneficiary to Denise, but it was rejected for two reasons. One, it was submitted by an agent under a power of attorney, and their firm policy disallows beneficiary changes via POA. Two, their records noted a January 7th phone call where a representative had spoken with my father and documented confusion inconsistent with comprehension of the nature of beneficiary designations. The compliance team opened a file and placed a hold on any change. After receiving my certified letter and the physician's capacity statement, they closed the file and reaffirmed the original designation. The letter said the transfer to me would be processed within 15 business days upon receipt of the death certificate. I read it twice. Then I cried for 10 minutes on my bed with the envelope under my cheek. Denise filed an objection at probate. She said the no contest clause was unfair. She said the June schedule was stale. She said the deed was trickery. A hearing was set for April 29, 2025, at 9 in the morning. The courtroom was surrounded by chairs that looked like they had listened to hundreds of stories like mine. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with an updo that did not move when she spoke, and an expression that suggested she had already read everything important. Hargrove sat beside me. Denise sat with a lawyer she found on a billboard, a man with a bright tie and sharper elbows. Mira was there because Hargrove had subpoenaed her. She brought her notary journal, a little black book that is ordinary until it is the most powerful item in a room. The judge called our case. Hargrove laid out the facts in a crisp outline. Will dated June 12, 2023, self-proved, no contest clause. Schedule B referencing a transfer on death deed, recorded June 14, 2023, and a transfer on death designation for the brokerage account, dated May 29, 2023. He handed up certified copies. He called Mira. She testified to notarizing the deed. She had her journal open with the entry on June 12th, listing my father's name, his government ID number, and my initials because I had been there to drive my dad home from a lab appointment that day, and I had signed as a witness. I had forgotten that. The judge nodded when Mira described my father's demeanor, how he read the deed line by line out loud, how he insisted on initialing the margins because he wanted to show future readers where his eyes had been. Denise's lawyer cross-examined. He asked whether Mira understood that my father had a history of stroke. She said yes. He asked if she was a doctor. She said no. He asked if she had been paid by me. She said she charged her standard $90 fee and that my father had paid in cash. He asked if she knew anything about the brokerage account. She said no. He asked if she had any reason to doubt the validity of the notarial act on the deed. She said no. He asked the judge to consider equity. The judge said she was considering documents. Hargrove then called Linda, the brokerage compliance officer, by phone. She testified that the firm had received a change of beneficiary packet in January submitted under a power of attorney and had rejected it under policy. She read their policy language into the record. Beneficiary changes must be executed by the account owner with capacity, in person, via authenticated signature, and may not be executed by an agent under a power of attorney unless the instrument grants express authority, which in any event is subject to firm policy approval. She said a call note from January 7th indicated confusion and that after receiving a capacity letter from Dr. Sharp, they closed any change request. She confirmed the transfer to me would be completed once the court proceedings were wrapped. Denise's lawyer objected to the phone testimony. The judge overruled. Finally, Hargrove introduced the no contest clause from the will and the cross reference in Schedule B. He explained that under Texas law, such clauses are enforced unless probable cause exists for the challenge. He argued there was none. The deed was recorded before death. The brokerage designation predated the January event. A policy rejection added weight. He pointed at the clause. He let the words show their teeth. He sat down. Denise stood up and spoke without being asked. She said my father had told her in January that he wanted her protected. She said I had a YouTube channel and that I made money from telling stories. She called it performative grief. The judge tilted her head. Then she asked Denise a series of questions that cut clean. Did you read the deed before today? No. Did you know about the no contest clause before the will reading? No. Did you attempt to change the beneficiary of the account using a power of attorney? Yes. Did you understand a power of attorney ends at death? She hesitated, then said she did not know. Did you ever ask the attorney of record about the transfer on death deed process? No. The judge thanked her. She took a beat and then ruled. The house was outside probate, vested in me upon my father's death, subject to any mortgage and taxes. The executor would be appointed to handle the probate estate, which no longer included the house. The brokerage account was a non-probate transfer. The no contest clause would be enforced. If Denise continued to press a challenge without probable cause, she would forfeit her inheritances under the will and her position as executor, which she had not yet been granted. The judge encouraged us to leave with clarity. She signed an order. The gavel fell in a way that sounded like closure with a heartbeat still in it. You expect a victory lap after a decision like that, but families do not do clean endings. When the court cleared, Denise said to me that she hoped I enjoyed my haunted house. I said to her that I hoped she enjoyed the rest of the estate and the peace that comes from leaving the past alone. She scoffed. Kyle looked at the floor and then at me and then away again. Hargrove told me to record the court order with the county regarding the change of title. Mira hugged me, a brief squeeze that carried a message I still feel weeks later. Back in the hallway, a woman waiting on an adoption case squeezed my arm and whispered that she watches my channel. She said, "Keep telling the truth." I nodded, because that is the job, and sometimes The job is the only anchor you get. In the weeks that followed, I did the boring things that make a story real. I filed an affidavit of death of grantor with the county recorder so the chain of title reflected the transfer. I paid the recording fee, $34, and the clerk stamped the page with a quick wrist. I called the mortgage company and sent them the court order and a copy of the recorded deed. They updated their records. The property tax office updated the homestead status. The mailbox started to hold envelopes addressed to me with the words, "Current owner" in the window. I walked the perimeter of the yard with a rake and picked up branches blown down in a spring storm. The porch swing creaked a little less each time I sat on it. The brokerage wired the funds on May 8, 2025. The number looked like it could erase any doubt. $450,000 landing in an account with just my name on it. I did not touch it for 2 weeks, partly out of reverence, partly out of caution. When I finally moved a portion to a high-yield savings account and set up an appointment with a fee-only advisor, I wore my father's watch. On the phone with the advisor, I said the words that mattered. I will not be the kind of person who turns a gift into a flame. I set aside $50,000 for urgent repairs on the house because the roof had 20 years on it and the HVAC was older than Kyle. I put $100,000 into a diversified index fund plan with a focus on long-term stability. I set up an automatic contribution of $400 a month to a separate account that my dad used to call the Worry Less Fund, because names matter. Denise did not lose everything. That is not how justice works in the real world. The residual estate included my father's pension survivorship benefits, a car, and the contents of the house that were not part of my specific bequests or the deed. She kept the coin collection he loved, which used to make me jealous and now just makes me feel tender toward who he was. She paid the probate lawyer bill and did not call me again. The court closed the estate in July after the required notices and waiting periods. I signed the receipt of distribution with a steady hand and left the courthouse with paperwork and a slightly lighter step. There were other consequences that are harder to quantify but matter more than money. I stopped arguing with the ghost of a 15-year-old me who felt like she had to be loud to be loved. I opened a closet in the house and found a box of my mother's letters to my father, 37 of them, tied with a cord, stamped with dates from 1996 to 1998. The ink faded, but the language still alive. I read 3 and then closed the box for another day. I called Dr. Sharp and thanked him, not for the letter, but for the way he had spoken to my father, like he was still someone, even when the tests said otherwise. I hired a contractor and learned the joy of a new roof line and a crew that shows up at 7 in the morning with coffee and a joke. I filmed a video in the empty living room with a fresh echo and told my audience that clear paperwork is a love language. Not everything healed. Kyle sent me a text on Father's Day that said, "I hope you are happy." I typed and deleted 6 replies and then wrote the only one that felt like an olive branch rather than a match. I am grateful for Dad, yes. If you want to come by and pick up anything that is yours, let me know. He never responded. It took me a week to understand that silence was not my problem to solve. In August, I met Mira at a coffee shop because I owed her more than a hug. I brought a thank you card and a gift card and a drawing a viewer had made of my dad and me under the porch light last fall. She smiled and said, "Notarization is not glamorous, But every now and then, she gets to feel like she unlocked a door for someone who needed to get inside their own life. We talked about stamps and signatures and why ink matters. Before she left, she told me one last thing that settles my heart on rough nights. She said your father was so proud that day. He said you would hate this mess and you would handle it anyway. She sipped her tea and said he was right. When I tell this story now, people ask why I did not blow it up online during the fight, why I waited until the house was recorded, the funds were transferred, the judge had ruled. The answer is simple. Stories like this are not weapons, they are maps. You cannot map a place you are still getting lost in. I needed the path to harden under my feet before I invited anyone else onto it. I needed to be able to say with clarity which document mattered most and why, which date intersected with which signature, which clause made a liar sit down. It was that last clause, the no contest teeth, the one that pulled rank on bravado, that turned a smirk into a silence. It was the recorded deed that turned what a woman called performative grief into a transfer of title. It was the physician's letter that turned a claim of January loyalty into a policy rejection. It was the patience to do the work in days measured by fees and copies and stamps. I also needed time to understand my own grief, because justice does not erase sorrow. The house is mine now, but the porch swing groans sometimes like it knows who installed it. The kitchen smells like my mother's chili on some Sunday afternoons, even when I am making pasta. The bedroom at the back gets the light my father loved to read in. The first night I slept there, in May, when the funds were pending and the walls still smelled like fresh paint, I woke up at 2 in the morning and walked the hallway without turning on lights. The house made the same sounds it made when I was 8, when the air conditioner kicked on and the water heater clicked, and the neighbor across the alley took his dog out one last time before bed. I stood in the doorway of my father's room and whispered thank you to a man who had always had the good sense to make a list. There is a line my dad used to say when a project got sticky. Do the next thing that would make the rest easier. In this story, the next thing was not the loudest, it was the quietest. It was calling the notary whose name sat in the corner of a scan. It was asking a doctor to put into words what a brain can and cannot do. It was reading a will and then reading the schedule attached to it. It was seeing the clause nobody expected and understanding that it is sometimes the last clause that does the first work. It was paying $89 that turned a piece of paper into a bridge. If you are listening because you are in the middle of a mess like mine, remember that non-probate transfers can be your friend when used with care. Beneficiary designations on accounts can bypass the chaos of probate. Transfer on death deeds can transfer title directly upon death, but none of it works if no one records anything and if no one tells anyone. Make the list. Attach the list. Cross-reference the list. And if someone tries to change everything at the last minute, remember that capacity and policy and timing are not opinions. They are rails. If you have to, make the rails visible to a judge who prefers paper to theater. Every family story has its own set of names and dates and bills and disappointments. This one ends with a deed, a wire, a court order, and a porch that still holds the shape of my father's evening silhouette. It ends with me paying for a new roof and choosing paint that looks like storm clouds held at a distance. It ends with me sending a photo of the finished living room to the neurologist who wrote a letter and to the notary who wrote to the future with a stamp. It ends with a stepmother who gets what the will gave her and learns that sometimes the most expensive thing is a challenge you do not have the facts to win. It ends with me keeping the promises my father made while he still could and making a few of my own. I will close with the same quiet thing that opened this whole story. The last clause mattered. It mattered because my father's instinct was not to punish. It was to create a path where the least amount of fighting would accomplish the most fairness. It mattered because the person who smiled through a funeral thought the loudest moment would be the first one. She was not ready for the last one. I was. I had the deed with the right parcel number and the raised seal. I had the capacity letter with the right dates. I had the policy citation that made a compliance officer say no louder than any yes. I had a no contest clause that made bravado too expensive. And I had my father's voice on a video saying he did not want a court to decide who he loved. In the end, it did not. A court just confirmed it. Most of all, I had my own voice and the steady knowledge that truth does not need a microphone. It needs a record, which is, in the end, what After Her Lies has always been about. Making a record, making it clear, making it human. If you found something in this story that helps you, I am glad. If you found something that makes you finally update your own documents, I am grateful. If you found a way to forgive someone you do not owe anything to anymore, then you are stronger than I was when this began. 96% of viewers are not subscribed. So if you want more stories where family, money, and justice collide, tap subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments what part of this you needed to hear.